Are you guys ready? Okay. Oh, okay. Just to let everybody know, we'll be starting in just a minute. Yes. Yeah, maybe that wouldn't work. Do you want to pass it around? Oh, okay. Pass it back. So as soon as everybody gets their turtles, I guess you do. You too. Do you serve one? Well, let's start. I'm Shirley Fenton, the Managing Director of the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research, and thank you for coming today for our research seminar entitled Making Things Personal, Case-Based Reasoning for Patient Self-Management of Oral Anticoagulant Medications. And this is going to be given by two of our great students at the University of Waterloo, Pavel Roshanov and Noemi Chanda. We'll introduce Noemi and Pavel in just a second. So as I was saying, I really am very pleased that you've joined us. Before we start, I'd just like to let you know that we are having, I always have to do a couple of commercials before we start. We're holding two boot camps. These are 2.5-day courses on health informatics, and one is specifically for health information management professionals. That will be held in May 6 to 8 at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. And the second boot camp will be held in June here at the University of Waterloo. It's our regular health informatics boot camp, and that is from June 17th to the 19th. And we would be very pleased if you'd like to join us. Registration is still open for both, and you can register online. But I also have a couple of flyers if you want to take that with you. So without any further ado, I should tell you why the turtles. In order to get Noemi and Pavel to come today, I had to promise chocolate. Yeah, they very kindly brought chocolate back with them and gave me some chocolate when they took their trip to Belgium. So I said that if they came today, I would provide the chocolate. So hence, it's not quite all chocolate. It's chocolate and nuts and stuff like that. So anyway, so that's the reason for the turtles today. And I'll let Mahir introduce our guest speakers.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, two undergrad students from the University of Waterloo and the winners of the 2008 Agfa Healthcare Innovation Award. First, Pavel Roshanov, a fourth-year student in the Department of Health Studies and Gerontology. Pavel has interest in clinical decision support systems, workflow management, and knowledge translation. Second student, Noemi Chanda, a third-year student in arts and business at the University of Waterloo. Noemi has interest in health economics and cost-benefit analysis and public policy. Today, Pavel and Noemi will present their Healthcare Innovative Award idea that has been presented to the Agfa Healthcare in Belgium. Making things personal, case-based reasoning for patient self-management of oral anticoagulant medications. Welcome.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the kind introductions. Our presentation today is an adaptation from what we originally presented to Agfa. It's kind of been improved to add some academic aspects to it that we skipped when we spoke with them, but we'll tell you a little bit about the problem that our solution tries to address, the general solution that's out there for this problem, and how our solution falls really nicely into the landscape of what's happening in Ontario and throughout the world right now. So I'm actually going to quickly skim over this slide. It's what we're talking about is oral anticoagulant therapy, and really long-term oral anticoagulant therapy. The only approved oral anticoagulant for long-term therapy right now is warfarin. The trade name is Coumadin. It's a medication which has been around for a very long time. It's a very inexpensive medication. And while it's difficult to know exactly how many people are on the med right now, there are over 2 million people starting it every year in the US. I believe 30 million prescriptions were filled in 2004 in the US for warfarin. So it's a very commonly used medication. Now, there are some problems with it, and the major problem is that it has a really narrow therapeutic index, meaning that basically if you give too little, you're not achieving any effect, any anticoagulant effect, and the patient has a risk of clotting. And if you give too much, the patient runs a risk of bleeding. Now, it's narrow because, in fact, those two values are very close to each other, the dosing, so too much or too little. And what you do is you measure a patient's blood's propensity to clot through a blood test, from which you then calculate a value called an INR, an international normalized ratio. This value needs to fit within a particular range for different indications. I think for atrial fibrillation, the appropriate range is about 2.5 to 3.5 INR, and I think it's 2 to 3 for people with history of deep venous thrombosis. So the events that are associated with adverse events coming from warfarin are very expensive. If you clot, you have a stroke. That's a very expensive event. If you bleed, if the hemorrhage is in your brain, I mean, intracranial hemorrhage can kill you, and that's also, well, death is very expensive, and all the things managing, or all the costs around managing that are very high. The way warfarin is administered is that a patient is first started by an algorithm where a physician sits down and decides, okay, we need to begin the patient on what's called a loading dose of warfarin. You can't simply give the patient the dose that they're always going to be on. So you begin loading the patient on warfarin and at the same time administering heparin for the first, I think, few days, depending on how the patient responds. Slowly, you begin to lower the dose of heparin as the warfarin effect takes hold. It takes some time for the warfarin effect to take hold. But the response to warfarin varies a lot from patient to patient, and that's really what we're interested in, is that interpatient variability. Once you pass the loading dose stage, you get to a maintenance dose stage, and it's basically the dose that this patient's going to be on for the rest of their life, in some cases, for instance, if you have atrial fibrillation. That maintenance dose is really determined by your genetics and a whole bunch of other physiological and arthropometric factors, weight, height, diet, your behavior in general, whether you smoke, whether you drink, all of these things. And still, even though we know the effects of some of these variables, we don't quite know how they interact in different patients. So still, we're not able to explain all the variance between patients with these variables. The other thing is that therapy is really subject to a breakdown in communication. Basically, the physician sits down and he says, well, here's a guideline that I have for how we're going to dose you. And it becomes a trial and error process. And the patient needs to really understand that trial and error process. They need to understand the fact that, okay, it matters what I'm eating. It matters what other medications I'm taking. It matters what things like St. John's wort, herbal remedies, things like that I'm taking. So the patient becomes very involved in this therapy because if they don't, then their INR will quickly come out of that therapeutic range. And INR monitoring is very expensive, but we're going to talk now about that therapeutic range. So as I said, basically the risk of adverse events becomes very high very quickly as you fall below the INR, the therapeutic range of INR, and it becomes very high also if you go above for hemorrhage and for thrombosis. The question is what dose you need in every patient to be able to get that range, the INR range. And the answer is, of course, that there's a very large difference from patient to patient. One patient may need 4 milligrams a day, another may need 35. It's a very large difference. So what you need to do is you constantly need to do this laboratory monitoring with the INR to know, to be able to basically titrate the appropriate dose for the anticoagulant effect. So we then we looked through the literature and found that about 50%, or rather 50% of the time, patients who are on long-term anticoagulant therapy may actually be out of therapeutic range. So their risks are increasing quite dramatically when they're outside of therapeutic range, and they might be out of that for about half the time that they're on the medication. A recent meta-analysis found that actually half of bleeding and clotting events occur whether you're super therapeutic, so above the therapeutic range or below. The conclusions of that study were interesting. Actually, the author said that improved control of anticoagulation can reduce adverse events by up to 1/2. That's very interesting because they're basically assuming that your ability to stay within that therapeutic range will limit your risk of adverse events. But it's difficult to make that conclusion if you actually look at the results, because the people who stayed within therapeutic range still had the other half of the adverse events. So there are many other factors, in fact, that are important here. Like I mentioned, what the patient's eating, what their behavior is like, how much they weigh, all of these things, what other morbidities they have.
So the general solution, one of the solutions that they've come up with, is allowing patients to manage their own anticoagulant therapy. And as we noted, a lot of the different factors such as behavior and eating habits affect their anticoagulant therapy. And generally, patients are actually most knowledgeable in what they're doing in their day-to-day life. So allowing patients to manage their own therapy gives patients control and convenience over this therapy, and as well saves time for practitioners. And in terms of the healthcare system, it's seen improved outcomes and lower costs, mostly because of the lower risks of adverse events. And Ontario has estimated that almost 400,000 preventable adverse events occur every year. So this is something that if we can reduce, will really help the healthcare system.
Okay, so one of the technologies that's come on the market, I think in the last 10 years, has been these home INR or point-of-care INR monitors. What these do is they really replace the need to have that blood test taken and then get it sent to a laboratory for examination, the calculation of the INR, which then comes back to you. You call your physician and you say, this is my INR. He decides, well, that's out of therapeutic range. This is what you should do. Adjust your dose accordingly. What this does is that you can do it at home. The problem is these are actually very expensive devices. That device right now goes for about $2,500. And each strip, as you notice, they have little test strips. I think they're running between $10 and $15 a pop. So basically every time you use one, it's $10 or $15. So it's still quite an expensive process. In Europe, these have become more widely available, and they're used a lot more than they are in the United States and Canada. Mostly it's a regulatory problem. In Europe, many of the countries with socialized medicine have decided to fund some people who have been deemed capable of actually monitoring their own therapy. And in the United States, Medicare doesn't cover it, and I think insurance doesn't cover it either. So only about 1% of the people who are on warfarin are actually using these in the United States. In Canada, the device that's approved that I know of is Coagucheck. It's the Coagucheck system. Similar cost. I don't believe it's covered, although we know of one person who actually has had kind of a legal battle with his insurance company and did eventually get it covered. But the point is, the regulatory framework isn't really allowing for these things to become widely used in North America, but they are being used a lot more in the United States, or in Europe rather.
And there are a lot of benefits to using the INR monitor. We've seen improved patient satisfaction, avoiding unnecessary delays, and allowing for more prompt medication changes. The international regulations of the INR monitor have stated that patient self-management and self-testing is very effective in anticoagulant therapy, and as well maybe more effective, or at least as effective as using a practitioner, and the readings that occur are comparable to those that are taken from a laboratory setting. So we see at least the same results, and if not better, as well as improved patient satisfaction and practitioner satisfaction in the time saving.
So we decided to do a brief systematic review to actually see how effective rather is patient self-management of oral anticoagulant therapy compared to practitioner management. And we defined, and in general in the literature, self-management of warfarin is defined as both monitoring and self-dose adjustment. So you would have one of these meters, and you would check your INR, and then you would adjust your dose accordingly. And using the PICO framework, we defined our research question this way. Basically, we looked for studies that were at least 6 months in duration. It turned out that that actually wasn't enough to discover some of the things that we were looking at. We wanted to see whether there was actually a reduction in adverse events. However, adverse events are not very common events. So while we want to prevent them, they're still fairly uncommon. So the statistical power in most of these studies just wasn't there to tell us much about adverse events, but we did learn some things about INR control. And we came out with these 5 studies that actually met our inclusion and exclusion criteria. There were actually 14 studies initially, but after we ran through that criteria, we were able to get these 5. This is simply searching Medline, so other things like Scopus, CiteSeq, they haven't been searched. So this is just to kind of inform our own thinking on this. And we found that, yes, actually patient self-management, when the patients are selected, appropriate patients are selected for managing their therapy as deemed by a practitioner appropriate. They actually, it's just as good as practitioner management. So some of the limitations of the studies was that, well, there really couldn't be any blinding. While they were randomized trials, it's the nature of the therapy. You're running some pretty high risks, and the practitioner needs to know whether the patient is being anticoagulated in a particular way, whether they're being managed by a practitioner or by themselves. It's also important to note that training and selection were really important aspects of all of the studies. So every time someone was going to go on every time they were about to join the self-management arm, they were trained according to several different guidelines. And there was a specific patient selection process. Again, the patient selection process did vary, but the main things were cognitive ability, ability to understand anticoagulant therapy, kind of the theory behind anticoagulation, and the confidence in adjusting one's own dose after they get an irregular reading. So these are some important things, because not everyone is ready to make those adjustments when they see that information, knowing the risks out there. Some other interesting things are what the proportion of patients that are motivated to self-manage. That's not currently known. And actually, the cost of the INR monitor and the test strips is an issue if there's no private insurance coverage. That was noted. So some problems with self-management were noted by Worster, actually, in 2008. He did a narrative review on the topic, and he discussed the fact that you might actually be creating a more expensive process here, because as patients manage their own therapy, they may be contacting the physician a lot more often. They may have a lot more questions, and a lot of the benefits that come from these organized anticoagulation clinics that I'll talk about in just a second just aren't there. Now, organized anticoagulation clinics they're just that. I've actually been out with Jeff Nagy. He was a lecturer in the School of Pharmacy. He's a pharmacist, a clinical pharmacist, and what he does is he goes out to a small town called Wellesley around here, And he sits down, it's him and a nurse in one of these meters, and people from the town come, they have an appointment, and they get their finger pricked, the reading comes back, and he makes the adjustment right there. Now, it's a very streamlined process because that's all they do. It's not as though you come to your general practitioner and they have to kind of add this to their workflow. That's all they do. So there are some labor-saving kind of processes there, but those don't seem to be there if you do self-managed anticoagulation. At least that's what this author believes. And he makes the recommendation that, in fact, computerized decision support tools may alleviate a lot of this. They may allow the patient to make the decisions better, as opposed to having to ask their practitioner all the time.
So in terms of the political and social landscape of healthcare right now, the anticoagulant self-management module that we're going to propose really fits in to meet between the new opportunities that are coming up and the needs of patients. We see that the population is aging, and the Aging at Home strategy of Ontario predicted that the senior population will double in the next 16 years. So in order to meet the needs of those that wish to stay at home, they're giving $700 million in funding over the next 3 years. And it's interesting to know that 25% of that will be earmarked for innovative projects, particularly in the goal of the implementation of innovative technology applications in order to support the care delivery at home. And the motivation for this is cost reduction in terms of keeping people at home, as well as improving their lifestyle and better health outcomes. There's been evidence that supports that these type of services reduce the use of hospitals, emergency rooms, and prevent premature institutionalization of seniors. And as well, this fits in with the increased patient motivation to become increasingly informed and be part of the dialogue with their practitioner. As well, the informal caregiver plays a large role in this case with home care as well as in long-term care. And we see with the increased use of home INR monitors that there's more of a balanced dialogue between the patients and the practitioners, and patients want to be more in control of their health. Ontario's current e-health strategy, which was announced just last month by eHealth Ontario, which was just recently established as well, will take a lead role in harnessing information technology and trying to make their vision of achieving excellence in healthcare by harnessing information and actuality. The e-health strategy is a 3-year project with a price tag of $2.1 billion. And the 3 core clinical priorities of the strategy include medication management. They want to deal particularly with the problem of adverse drug events, in that adverse drug events, preventable adverse drug events, are actually the 4th leading cause of death in Ontario. And this strategy has a goal of implementing online medication management to minimize the preventable adverse drug events. And of the projects they outlined, one of the ones that was particularly interesting in the case of our project was the drug information system, in which they proposed creating medical profiles that include prescriptions, drug history, as well as e-prescribing and drug utilization review tools such as decision support tools, and giving the ability for us to track particular medical data. They use the example of tracking blood sugar readings, but in our case, INR readings would fit well into this. And they expect a full rollout by 2011. And although this may be ambitious, the whole development around this project would help the landscape for our system and add value to a provincial system like this.
Okay, so specifically what we thought would be a good solution to this problem is, as some of the recommendations had mentioned, a computerized decision support system. Now, ours is a little bit different from what other computerized decision support tools have been, in that it focuses on the patient. So really, the goal is to give the patient the power to make decisions. You're really supporting their decision-making process as opposed to a clinician's decision-making process. Inherently, that has many challenges. Of course, a clinician is able to look at the information that they're given and understand the theories behind, the kind of biomedical theories behind what the system is suggesting, whereas a patient may not be able to do that. And these are some of the challenges that need to be addressed. Now, As I mentioned earlier, the way warfarin is managed is really through guidelines and through trial and error. Why the trial and error comes in is because of that great interpatient variability. So every patient's very different. Now, there are guidelines that say this is the dose you should give if this happens, but every patient is very different. So really what happens is physicians operate on a case-based level, and they think about cases that look a very similar way. And the solutions that worked for those cases, or the approaches that worked for those cases, they try and apply to new cases. This is actually case-based reasoning. It's a methodology which has been discussed in the literature since the 70s under different names. And in 1993, I think it was Amat and Piazza who finally formalized it as a kind of an umbrella term for all of these things like experiential learning, analogy-based reasoning. And the idea is that you solve problems by retrieving previous solutions to similar problems. You implicitly can capture the variability between patients, variability in warfarin response, because if you have a great number of variables about every patient, you don't need to predict necessarily using an algorithm how those variables will play out. You know what solution works to bring down or bring up their INR. So what dosage will be appropriate in a given situation to adjust the patient's INR back into therapeutic range. We don't know whether this works or not. In fact, that's where the contribution would come in, is that this hasn't been done before. Most of the approaches out there, or all of the approaches out there, are really based on creating algorithms that are statistically driven. So we want to avoid the use of generic guidelines by using something like this. And I'll also note later that case-based reasoning can be used with other AI methodologies, like rule-based reasoning. So if you don't have a case that fits your problem exactly, you can still revert back to the old way of thinking that with some rules to basically guide you. Okay, so the way you can conceptualize case-based reasoning is that a case is a set of problems and solutions. There's a problem space and a solution space, and every problem points to a solution in the solution space. Really, what the authors have proposed here is that what you can do is simply describe a problem, match it to a problem that exists in this repository of cases. Oh, beautiful. Match it to what exists in this repository of problems, and that should then take you to a solution that worked for solving this problem. And this then becomes the solution you use. The beauty is that it's a very personalized approach. It's a solution that fits someone who looks exactly like you. It's not a solution that fits 74% of people who look somewhat like you. It's a solution that's very similar, that's very personalized. So in a way, this is a way to enable personalized medicine. So what we propose here, this is an adaptation of Amat and Piazza's original case-based reasoning cycle. The idea is a patient has an INR monitor and is able to take their INR and answer a series of questions to create a structured profile of themselves, which includes information on each of a series of variables that have been deemed appropriate for this problem space. So, for example, in genetics, we know that VCOR-C1 and CYP2C9, VCOR-C1 is vitamin K oxidase reductase complex. It's oxidase epoxide reductase complex. It's an enzyme that actually warfarin is targeting. So the genetic variation in this enzyme is very important because it actually determines how effective warfarin will be at a given dose in that patient. CYP2C9 is a gene coding for one of those P450, cytochrome P450 proteins in the liver. It basically determines how fast warfarin is going to be cleared from the body, because warfarin is cleared from the body almost exclusively by metabolism. So this gene determines the rate of metabolism. In fact, it's a few different variations in this gene. I think CYP2C9, 3 and 2 both cause slow metabolism, and this one doesn't impede metabolism as much. And of course, weight, height, all of these things. Now, there will be many other variables that we don't know exactly. I think these are ones that just came from the top of our head that will be important in a case structure. And then you pair this profile up with a problem. Your problem is that your INR is too high. Now, and it's 4.4. And we know now a patient that looks like this and has an INR 4.4 needs to go back down to, say, 2.5 to 3.5, and is eating leafy greens, and maybe there's a kind of an amount there of how much they're eating, and has these indications. Well, perhaps there's someone else inside a repository of cases that looks exactly like this and solved a similar problem of bringing down their INR with a given dose of warfarin. So you can simply input this, retrieve the similar cases, which then give you a solution, or one of several solutions which you can choose from. Hopefully you can choose one that's that's closest to your profile and your problem. And you can choose to either reuse that solution or adapt it, change it as you see fit. Maybe their INR was higher, so they took a larger dose of warfarin, and you take slightly less. But that's really the process of trial and error that physicians go through all the time. The benefit is that the patient knows a lot of other things about themselves. They know that last night they had 2 drinks, and perhaps that's what's driving down their INR. So one of the problems in adjusting warfarin by physicians is they often over-adjust, whereas perhaps they don't need to adjust by that much. Knowing a patient knowing what they did last night or a couple of days ago, knowing how it would affect their INR, maybe they'll just adjust by a little bit, and then they'll be aware of the fact that they can go back to their regular dose soon. And in fact, that's very much of what people like Jeff Nagy do, because they get to know their patients in that anticoagulation clinic, and they know, well, I know that he has a couple of drinks every Monday, so what happens is his INR changes. And you can either choose that solution, decide whether it works for you. Once you use it, did it work? Did it bring your INR down to where it should be? Or did it actually take more warfarin for you to bring your INR down? Or to bring it up, rather. You then can revise that solution and say, well, it didn't work, and this is what did work. And then you create really a new case with your profile and the solution that worked for you. So again, it's quite personalized. And the next patient who comes in, looks like this, has a similar problem, can go through the same cycle. And what this really is machine learning. I mean, you have a repository of solutions or of cases, solutions and problems that are constantly being updated as people use them. At the beginning, something like this wouldn't have many highly personalized solutions, but you can always revert to the rule-based approach that's used. Okay. So as I mentioned, case-based reasoning is really machine learning. It's coupled to learning. Learning occurs as a natural byproduct of the problem solving. So when the problem is solved successfully, that solution is stored in a repository. The question is, to what extent can we actually realize the full scope of case-based reasoning in a patient-oriented system for anticoagulation therapy? It's a difficult problem because it assumes some things. It assumes whether that the patient actually knows the theory of anticoagulation well enough to understand dose adjustments and all these things, to understand the fact that St. John's wort will, for example, affect their INR, to understand the fact that celery will affect their INR. And to understand what are dangerous values and what are not. And the patient also has to be comfortable making these adjustments by themselves. However, patients who are already doing these adjustments by themselves are probably the ideal kind of audience or target market for a solution like this. Hopefully, a better solution than simply guess and check will be able to expand that group of people. So more people will actually be able to benefit from self-management. And again, this is the actual case-based reasoning cycle as it was originally. It was 1994 actually that it was designed. So one of the things is we need to come up with a way to do case structure. This is an ontology of a problem, not exactly an entire case because the solution piece isn't here. But as I mentioned earlier, see, you can include some of these important genetic variables. It was actually an article, actually in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of development in the genetic side of warfarin, and genetic testing for warfarin is actually is intended to become mainstream. A recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine, I think in February, discussed the value of a dosing algorithm informed by genetics over a typical clinical algorithm, and found that it was actually significantly more effective. It improved time in INR range significantly, and it reduced, obviously it reduced time outside of INR range. It improved time to therapeutic INR. So you were more quickly able to get inside your therapeutic range. And again, these two variables, or these two genetic components are always coming up. They really explain about 40%, those are the estimates, they explain about 40% of the interpatient variation. So any system like this should give people the option of putting in this information if they know it. And as genetic testing comes online, they'll have more and more access to that kind of information. And of course, all the other things, such as your age, your height, your weight, all the other variables that we know have an effect on warfarin response. And the idea quickly here was that we can do this as a web-based system, and there will be a case repository that you can then access over the internet from your web browser. And perhaps we can then include also the family health teams, the pharmacist, the physician, the nurse, all those other people that are involved in your care, as opposed to alienating them. So in the design of such a system, these are the kind of things we need to be thinking about. And of course, security considerations come in there, but we're not going to pretend to know anything about security anymore. So we're going to assume that there are people in this room who understand those things much better than we do. But we are mindful of the fact that security is very important when creating such systems.
And in terms of the potential users, we've talked about how the type of patient who would use the system has to be carefully selected. Generally, they have already been informed by their physicians if they're able to manage their own anticoagulant therapy currently, even without the use of these tools. So these tools would actually just improve their ability to do that and perhaps lessen the amount of time that they will have to refer to their physician or the laboratories. But as well, we have to mention that caregivers would have play a large role in this, both formal and informal, in long-term care or home care facilities. This would be perfect for a caregiver, as often they may be more computer savvy and very motivated in order to take care of the person who needs this oral anticoagulant therapy. So a tool like this would be great to teach to those both formal and informal caregivers, as well as patients who are able to manage it themselves. So those who may not be able to manage it themselves may have someone close to them who could help them through this process. And in terms of the different types of vendors and different groups who would see benefit in this system, there are a variety of different groups. We talked about patients, but hospitals and pharmacies, as well as family health teams and long-term care facilities and home care. And particularly, this module would be a value-added component to EHR vendors and INR monitor vendors. They could package this with their system, and it would be something to improve the health outcomes reached by their systems currently. And also, it's important to mention that we would have to use existing information technology and devices, ones that are proven to be efficient and useful and safe, not only because they're proven, but because it would be important to make sure the system is interoperable with existing technology. And as we see a push towards provincial or national healthcare systems, we need to make sure that this module would work well within these systems so that the most people can use it and people are motivated to incorporate it into their daily health activities. And usability, as we know, is crucially important to any system. It can really make or break the success of a system. It's important, especially when talking about systems that will be used with the general public, that human and computer interaction components are taken into account. Particularly user interface design is important so that the patient understands what to do and is not confused in the use of the system. A few components that were also addressed in other information systems that were used by patients is that the number of clicks is important. So to reduce the number of clicks to about 8 or 10, just so that the patient doesn't get confused, doesn't get bored, or loses motivation to actually complete the activity. As well, reducing the download times, because there'll be many different users with different technological capabilities. So having a limited amount of pictures, and so that the process will be quick, and the whole process should actually take under 30 minutes, closer to 20, 25, because after that time, it seems that a lot of patients will just lose motivation and don't see the actual benefit that the system is supposed to be giving. Also, we mentioned that using something like the Metathesaurus in order not only to ensure interoperability with other systems, but as well to make sure that the terms that are used are understood by the general public. So medical terms are used, but as well given synonyms that the general public will use, and explanations that they will understand, as well as relationships between the different vocabulary that is used. It's also important to ensure ongoing evaluation, not just at the beginning of the project, but throughout, and to test different types of cases with different individuals, so groups that may be more comfortable with using technology, groups that are less comfortable with it, more groups that may be more open to managing their oral anticoagulant therapy, and groups that actually may be initially adverse to the idea, but to see what will actually be useful and how they can use the system to the benefit, to their benefit. And it was also important to note that to include an imperative clause in the system, so that initially when information is trying to be retrieved, if there is something that comes up and it seems that is an emergency, to make sure to note that you should consult your physician. So it's not an ultimate reliance on the system, that we make sure that they should consult a physician if it's something that isn't just something that is an emergency. They need to be consulting a physician. But as well, it was noted that patients don't like to just be given a dialog box that says consult your physician with no extra information, so it also would be important to include why they should consult a physician, what they should do at that moment, to make sure that there aren't any emergency adverse events happening during that time. And some of the further questions in usability that have been brought up were particularly involving, for example, the mental state. Also using the system as well throughout any type of illness, the mental state can affect either the motivation or the willingness to adjust their own therapy, and the confidence they have in doing that using a system at home. So how the mental state would actually affect their ability to use a system like this. Also, the level of confidence and the understanding of the theory of anticoagulation is very important. And as well, the interaction between the patient's state and their satisfaction. So does their health outcome respond to their satisfaction?
Okay, so actually on the topic of usability, I think Naomi was referring to a system by Olivier Curet, I think in the early 2000s. In France, it's the IMSA project. It's a patient-oriented information system. And him and Finkelstein in 2003 at the Boston Medical Center found that basically if you design your system well, even people who aren't computer literate by some standards are quite capable of using it. In fact, they've been able to achieve very high levels of compliance, very high levels of kind of comfortable use of such a system with proper design, and they outline their design guidelines. So that kind of information is out there. It has been done before. Both of those systems are really designed for patient management of some conditions. The one by Finkelstein is on chronic disease management. It's a telemedicine system. And he's tried diabetes and chronic, or rather cardiovascular disease.
Mm-hmm. And the system by Curet is for mild clinical symptoms, so coughs and colds and things that you may be able to get over-the-counter medication for. So that's what that system revolved around as well.
Okay, and so from here on, our focus is to develop a prototype. This needs to happen just so that we can begin answering some of these questions. They're very important questions. We think that we'll really be making significant contributions to the literature if we're able to do that. because there's so many things to consider. People who are on warfarin are at a higher risk of stroke. If they're at a higher risk of stroke, they're at a higher risk of TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. That's a mini stroke. Basically, it comes and it goes. But for that time, the patient is experiencing some symptoms like a stroke patient. So how do you expect that someone who's undergoing something like that would be using your system? These are all questions that we have to answer. How well will a patient actually be able to use the entire CBR cycle? How well will a patient be able to say, this solution won't work for me, I need to adapt it? How well will a patient be able to say, this is why the solution worked? And determine actually what was the reason, what was it that actually brought their INR down? Questions of quality of cases. It's very difficult for someone who doesn't really understand the anticoagulant therapy, kind of the theory behind anticoagulation well. It's very difficult for them to know what caused what and why their problem was solved. So that information is going to go into a case, and a patient's going to refer to it in the future. We don't want to kill that patient because the first patient didn't understand why they were able to solve their problem. Maybe it just happened because they stopped eating celery, but they didn't realize it. So it's what questions we ask, how we ask them, and a very careful selection of the patients who will actually be using a system like this. These are all things that we can only answer when we actually develop a prototype. And of course, how can the clinician remain involved? So that's where we're headed. From here on, we need to apply for a grant, hopefully by an answer grant or something like that. And we're looking to get some students at the University of Waterloo or perhaps at McMaster University to begin developing something like this. Starting it out it shouldn't be very difficult. It's just that we have to get it started in order to begin answering some of these questions. And again, I think that it will make a significant contribution. So thank you very much.
So you have a chance to ask questions and make comments, and I'll give you an opportunity to get a microphone to you, and please speak directly into it.
Hi, I'm Janusz and I'm from chemical engineering. My question is about your prototype that you will have to build. The information coming into your prototype is going to be sort of a mixed information. Some of it is easy to express numerically, others are not. So have you thought about, the combination of more or less numerical information with subjective information?
Many case-based reasoning systems actually use free text in their case structures. Now, and actually this was pointed out by one of the physicians at Agfa, was that isn't the way that this would work well. So structured case structure would be important. So structured information. So some of that numerical information is very easy to put in a structured way. But some of that other information, we'd have to standardize the patient responses in some way. So something like dialogue, or rather, I guess, drop boxes or choices where patients have some choice of things, so they know which one to choose, or they choose other if they indicate that it's really not that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of the existing information systems oriented to patients have only restricted to drop boxes just because of that particular issue, but the only problem is that restricts a lot of the answers, so yeah.
So it will really be the feedback of patients such as yourself who would be very, very helpful, people who have been on a warfarin in the past and have managed it on their own. Anyone kind of from the audience or the people that we talk to as we go through this process, it would be very important to get their input.
Let me add, I have some personal experience with warfarin. About 9 years ago, I had congestive heart failure, and I was on warfarin for several months. And the dose adjustment was a major, major problem. And finally, my doctor said, left it up to me to make the dose adjustment. But unfortunately, I had to do it by trial and error.
Yeah.
So I cut up the pills for little sections, and every time I had a new measurement, I had to sort of add on to it or take less of it.
Exactly. So you were able to generate your own solutions.
Yes.
Would you not benefit from something where you were at least able to refer back to your own solutions that you generated in the past? Because if you were on warfarin for years, I mean, certainly you learn how to adapt, how to manage your therapy, but perhaps in some situations you would like some more detail. So that's really that experiential learning that we're trying to capture within the system.
Thank you.
Other comments?
My name is Chris Redmond. I think I'm your ideal test patient, as I've been largely altering my own warfarin doses for the last 10 years. And of course, the obstacle in the system that we're in is getting the INR readings, getting that information on a fast enough feedback cycle to make those adjustments. I have no trouble at all believing that what you describe will work, and that it will work somewhat better than the rule-based or instinct-based system that people like me have been using. I think the biggest obstacle is going to be getting somebody to pay for it. Can you tell us a little more about what response you got from Agfa and what response you think you will ever get from the government of Ontario?
Unfair.
Do you want to?
Well, as I mentioned, some of the policies that have been announced actually this year and the end of last year do want to motivate innovation and using technology to improve healthcare. So it may be more of an indirect approach and approaching them and saying that this is something that will actually reduce the cost of healthcare in terms of practitioners, emergency room visits, and the like. So I know that the one patient that we had talked to said that he was able to get some sort of funding only on the event that he explained that it was actually cost effective. So that may be a way for us to approach it. I mean, it will obviously have to be developed into some sort of economic solution, but I think cost effectiveness may be the approach that they were willing to take. And if we show that it is cost effective, perhaps we'll be able to get some sort of funding for that. But I know that has been an issue, and we've been trying to look into that.
This is something that we hope to bundle with existing things like the CoaguCheck monitor, for example, would be a prime example of something that would benefit from this solution. Other things is as EHR technologies come online, so more and more people are selling these electronic health record systems that patients can use as well. This can be a module that adds value to their system. So that was actually one of the recommendations is for these new EHR systems, perhaps warfarin-focused decision support modules could really help. The other thing is, there are many arguments saying that warfarin is underutilized. Many people say that warfarin is underutilized. In fact, some people suggest that there are somewhere between 7.5 and 35 or even 50% of people who have atrial fibrillation, who can be using warfarin, who could be benefiting from it, are not using it because of the risks. So there's an underutilization of this medication. The other argument is, well, warfarin is going to go. We're developing new medications, things like factor 10A inhibitors and direct thrombin inhibitors, which should then replace warfarin. However, the tests have demonstrated that these are not safe for long-term use. So, in fact, zamilitran is a medication. It's a direct thrombin inhibitor, which was approved in France only for short-term use, less than 12 days. It's not approved by the FDA in the US, and I'm not sure whether it's approved in Canada, but I don't think so. The problem was that it was elevating people's AST, their liver enzymes, causing liver damage, and basically it killed a couple of people after longer-term use. So when these medications do become refined enough, they'll be very expensive because of the development period that's gone in. And warfarin is extremely inexpensive. So it will be around for a long time. And that is one of the ways that they've gone towards solving it, is developing better medications. And the other way, of course, is figuring out how to manage the existing medication better. The FDA has acknowledged the efficacy of, or the effectiveness of genetic testing, the effectiveness of knowing something about a person's genetic profile when administering warfarin, and has actually put labels on warfarin bottles, I believe, in the U.S. About if a patient has this particular mutation, then expect that they're a slower metabolizer. Also, different races. There are many things going on really in trying to better manage warfarin, and I think that is the route that will be most important in the next few years. So we can make the argument.
Over here for the question from the web.
A comment and question. Many patients with atrial fib don't use warfarin because nobody wants to monitor them.
Yeah.
So, question, can you speak to the generalizability of this type of system to other self-management strategies, such as diabetes management?
That would be very interesting. It's not an area that we've explored, but perhaps it would be. I began looking at it actually over just the last few weeks, and I can't really comment, but there are some people, for example, Don Callan is involved in a project called, I don't
even
quite
know the
remember.
name.
There. You don't remember? Yeah, it's a system for managing. Med Manager, exactly. It's a system for managing diabetes, similar. So if we're able to refine this technology and be able to generalize it, that would be ideal if we can actually generalize it to other problem spaces, not just anticoagulation, then yeah, diabetes is the next logical place to explore.
And to some extent, I think we're modeling after that self-management idea and being able to put the control into the patient's hands. So if we are able to use this in this particular case and using case-based reasoning, which is something that's more individualized, then yeah, that we can bring that to these groups that have been more used to using as well generalized rules and probabilities. So it's something that we can definitely adapt to that, since the idea and the whole model around it is similar.
Question here.
Yeah, just you had a map that showed different a structure, like a tree with different branches.
The ontology.
That shows.
The ontology.
I can't recall, but that shows the different factors that you have to take into account.
It's an example,
Now,
yes.
Right. Out of interest, are you aware of which factors have to be tightly controlled as to, because some of those may not necessarily matter, right? The range of some of those might have to be very wide and it still doesn't matter. But there are those that need to be tightly controlled to be able to come up with a proper solution. Are you aware of which ones are?
You mean some are more important to the case than
They have
others?
more weight to the,
Yes. Yeah, well, certainly it's a topic of further research. And in fact, there's a lot of research going on in that area right now. The genetic factors are big. They explain a lot of the variability from patient to patient. Nearly 40%, yeah, together. Other things are, yeah, behavioral things. Smoking, I know, is a big one. Alcohol consumption as well. I think diet also, with respect to how much vitamin K you're actually taking in. Because vitamin K warfarin is a vitamin K antagonist. So in fact, that vitamin K dose that you take in every day is working directly against what warfarin's doing. So that's a big factor. That is an important thing, though, that when we actually begin to build the system, we need to be able to attach kind of weights of importance, if you will, to different to the different units here, to the different variables. The problem is some variable, that weight changes depending on the patient. I mean, we can probably get general ideas of what's more important in general, but it changes depending on the patient. So we'll have to find out.
Quick ones?
This is frozen.
This reminds me, this looks to me like a steady state structure.
Huh.
What I mean is it's a stable structure.
Yeah.
What happens if I don't forget to take a pill? Okay, in other words, I'm in a more of a time dependent
Yeah.
situation? Because there's no time dependence in this one.
We're definitely thinking about that, and I've actually been thinking about that problem in terms of how to use case-based reasoning with workflow management. So a totally different area, but time dimension is very important in medicine because it's those changes over time that really determine what you should be doing. We're going to have to.
You see,
look
because if
exactly
you
at
use frequency
Yeah.
per se, there's no time dependency
Yeah.
because you use it at the same time. You reach a steady state.
What can happen is that could be part of the problem that you state. Now, this is part of really a patient profile. I've called it here a problem structure, but it's really more of the patient profile. So normally you do 2 every day, or you have a fixed dosing schedule. Now your problem is you missed one, and your
Yes,
INR is
that's
up.
it.
So
That's
exactly.
when-
So that's where we can capture that.
Okay.
And there are certainly other ways to do it. It just needs to be thought out in more detail.
I've got a number of comments myself.
So the prototype that you were developing, what kind of cohort would you be looking at when you're developing the very first? So what particular, would it be chronic patients over span of time, or would it be, over a lesser amount of time? Or would it be a particular age group that you would be looking at when you're actually developing the prototype?
Well, in efforts, I mean, it would have to be representative people. So people who are on warfarin for a long period of time, because that's really what seems to be the issue. And people who, I suppose, age-wise, the different studies seem to have different median ages for the people that they enroll, but around 60 years of age is a typical number. And we'd have to be as representative as possible. Now, it's the development of the prototype that needs to be even undertaken. We've designed exactly how we'd like to begin looking at the problem, but we need people with more technical know-how to actually begin building it. Hopefully we can find that here or at McMaster or anywhere really.
And it's important to design around a wide range of people. So within that representative sample, we need to make sure that it's something that can be used for people, like as I mentioned, who are less technologically savvy or maybe less motivated than some others to use self-management. But one of the problems, I think, is with evaluation and just making sure that a good and representative evaluation is taking its course throughout the entire development, which is sometimes difficult to actually evaluate health outcomes from a system. So that's something that we have to work with.
In this case, we do have very specific outcomes like time spent inside INR range, therapeutic range, time outside, and adverse events. But that's way down the road. At this point, if we need people's input, it will really have to be people who are on warfarin right now, who perhaps have been self-managing. That would be ideal. And perhaps people who haven't been, maybe they can explain to us why they haven't been. Maybe we could address that. But it would be the people who are ideal for self-management, deemed by physicians, by practitioners, that we'd have to be looking at.
Thank you.
I have a couple of general comments. I have to look at my notes to remember what they all are, but when you guys talked about the issue, based on the question about the justification, you almost could use, given the experiment here, a case-based reasoning approach to the economic justification, where each case drove might be one way of building up a base of evidence and then presenting that evidence. It's kind of an interesting possibility. Never occurred to me before.
It's very common in law to do that. I mean, it's cases that set the precedent for
Yeah, you
other
can use
cases.
the same framework
Yeah.
and
Yep.
even work out the same type of an ontology related to it. So I'm not sure this would work with patients, not with these brilliant people here, but the ordinary patient. But certainly it would work, I believe, with the patient properly coupled to the physician. Not having to go to the office or the lab every day or all that, but a properly coupled, I'll call it telemedicine or portal type approach would seem to work, which of course requires a new mode of remuneration because that would be the first issue. But I think in looking at this, my suggestion would be to look at the collaborative patient, because that's what we're not trying to create independent, medically knowledgeable
Absolutely.
patients. We're trying to create a good relationship between the expert and the
To
receiver
increase the
of that.
dialogue, really.
Yeah, so it's very thought, it requires a fair amount of thought. One of the big issues in case-based reasoning, it goes back to the early work by Jim Fries on this, is the ability to index the cases properly. In other words, that data set that's crucial. And you already indicated that you even have bad interactions with this in the therapeutic range. So we obviously don't know all the variables, and maybe genetics will bring some, but maybe there are others. So the one big issue is how you evolve that set of indices and are able to thereby evolve the base for the reasoning based on the new information that becomes available. I have no idea what the solution to that is, and I don't know if you want to comment on that at all. But
the way they seem to do that is they use a knowledge, general knowledge base, which can be an ontology that represents all of the concepts kind of inside the problem space. So you could then also be using things like rule-based reasoning to guide you a little bit.
yeah, you need that other part
Yeah,
of the machine
it always has to
learning
be a matter
thing.
of layers. Yeah.
I just want to confirm from my, just because I know a few things, that you are not a computer scientist.
No.
No.
You haven't studied in the School of Pharmacy.
No.
And you really aren't, haven't had much of a background in health informatics, I mean, in terms of actual training. I think that's important as make a couple of comments here. One thing I did get out of your talk, by the way, if I may go on Coumadin myself because I don't like celery in my Bloody Mary. So I'll look at the fact of celery compared, I didn't know celery had an effect on Coumadin, but to me, just a broad comment, and this is the subject of an undergraduate thesis that you're actually, this is
Actually not. This is not.
completely different. Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of that. But a type of problem like this is at the core of health informatics. Really, it's really got every aspect almost of health informatics in it. So being at the heart of health informatics, this illustrates the kind of thing we're talking about in the center of health informatics. You two guys, in approaching this, have approached it in a multidisciplinary fashion. I know, because I've worked with you, you've had to learn all of these pieces, and you've done it without those specific backgrounds. What you've done is create the heads that go with that heart of a problem. And I think it's noteworthy that you did it, how you did it, that you did it, and where you're going after this. And just to point out, I don't know what Noemi, but Pavel is going to McMaster, is going to be in the clinical epidemiology program, and I believe you've landed a scholarship to help you with that. Noemi, where are you heading from here?
Well, I still have another year of undergrad, but I plan to also pursue
So you've
a
got
master's
even more
education,
promise
so-
because you're younger than this turkey, right?
Yeah, I have a good
so
momentum.
I have found, first of all, Shirley found these guys and has worked with them over the years. And they have gradually become involved in activities of the Institute. And to me, you're the type of students that we are so proud to have any part in whatsoever. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
I too want to thank Noemi and Pavel, a very interesting discussion. And as Dominic pointed out, this is a multidisciplinary problem. I'm sure you'll be searching for experts from all of your other students to help you with solve this problem. And if anybody in the audience is willing to put some time and energy in, I'm sure they'd be very thankful for that as well. So thank you for coming out today, and we'll have our next seminar next month, and please come back and join us again. So have a great weekend. It's going to be great weather out there. So thanks.
Thank you.
You know,